In August 1939, the world watched in stunned disbelief as two mortal enemies signed a non-aggression pact. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, ideological opposites locked in bitter hatred, suddenly became partners. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact shocked diplomats across Europe, but those who understood Adolf Hitler knew it was merely a temporary convenience, a chess move to buy time. Stalin, the paranoid Soviet dictator, chose to believe in this fragile peace. Hitler, meanwhile, had already made his decision. The question was never if he would invade the Soviet Union, but when. That decision, to launch Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, would become the single most fatal mistake of World War II, costing millions of lives and ultimately sealing Nazi Germany's doom. Hitler sat in his mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden, gazing out at the Bavarian Alps. It was late 1940, and Nazi Germany stood at the zenith of its power. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. Britain cowered behind the English Channel, its cities burning under the Luftwaffe's bombs. Most of Europe bent the knee to the swastika. Yet Hitler was not satisfied. His eyes turned eastward, toward the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, that Judeo-Bolshevik empire he had always despised. In his twisted ideology, the Slavic peoples were Untermenschen, subhumans, destined to be enslaved or exterminated to create Lebensraum, living space for the German master race. His generals gathered around the map table, their faces a mixture of confidence and concern. General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, outlined the plan. A massive invasion force of over 3 million men, organized into 3 army groups, would strike like a lightning bolt across a 1,800-mile front. Army Group North would drive toward Leningrad, Army Group Center would race toward Moscow, and Army Group South would seize Ukraine's rich farmlands and push toward the oil fields of the Caucasus. The Soviet Union will collapse like a house of cards, Hitler declared, his voice filled with certainty. One good kick, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. Some generals harbored doubts. They remembered Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812, the endless steppes, the brutal winter, but Hitler dismissed their concerns. The Wehrmacht had conquered everything in its path. Why would Russia be different? The fatal flaw in Hitler's thinking was not merely military, it was rooted in his racist delusions. He genuinely believed the Soviet Union was weak, its army decimated by Stalin's purges, its people inferior. He failed to understand the depth of Russian resilience, the vastness of Soviet resources, and the iron will that would emerge when the motherland faced extinction. June 22, 1941, at 3:15 a.m. Along the entire length of the Soviet border, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, the thunder of artillery shattered the pre-dawn silence. 3 million German soldiers, supported by 3,600 tanks and 2,700 aircraft, surged forward in the largest military invasion in human history. The initial results seemed to confirm Hitler's prophecy. Soviet forces, caught completely unprepared despite numerous warnings that Stalin had ignored, reeled backward in chaos. Entire armies were encircled and destroyed. In the first weeks, the Germans captured hundreds of thousands of prisoners, destroyed thousands of tanks and aircraft, and advanced hundreds of miles. Stalin, who had refused to believe intelligence reports of the impending invasion, suffered what may have been a nervous breakdown. For days, he disappeared from public view, leaving the Soviet Union leaderless at its darkest hour. When he finally emerged, gaunt and shaken, he delivered a radio address that revealed his desperation. Brothers and sisters, a grave danger hangs over our country, but something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, the Soviet people rallied. The invasion awakened something primal. This was not a war of ideology anymore, but a war of survival, a great patriotic war to save the motherland from annihilation. Factory workers dismantled entire industrial plants and transported them eastward, beyond the Ural Mountains, where they would continue producing weapons. Millions of civilians dug anti-tank ditches and fortifications. Soldiers who had retreated in disorder began to fight with suicidal determination. Cities that were supposed to fall in days held out for weeks. The German advance, though spectacular, began to slow. The distances were vast, far greater than anything the Wehrmacht had encountered in France or Poland. Supply lines stretched thin. Tanks broke down on primitive roads that turned to mud with the autumn rains. The Red Army, though battered, refused to die. By December 1941, the German army stood at the gates of Moscow. Forward reconnaissance units could see the spires of the Kremlin through their binoculars, but they could advance no further. The Russian winter arrived early that year, and it arrived with a vengeance. Temperatures plunged to 40 degrees below zero. German soldiers, who had been told the campaign would be over before winter, had no winter clothing. Their vehicles wouldn't start. Their weapons froze and jammed. Frostbite claimed thousands. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov, who had been quietly assembling reserve forces from Siberia, launched a massive counteroffensive on December 5th. Fresh troops, equipped for winter warfare and fighting to save their capital, slammed into the exhausted German lines. For the first time since 1939, the Wehrmacht retreated. Hitler, in a fit of rage, fired his top generals and assumed personal command of the army. He issued his infamous Stand Fast order, no retreat, regardless of circumstances. While this order did prevent a complete collapse, it also doomed thousands of German soldiers to pointless deaths in frozen trenches. The strategic situation was now irrevocably changed. The lightning war had failed. The Soviet Union had not collapsed. Instead of a quick victory, Germany faced an endless war of attrition, the very thing Hitler's generals had warned against. The year 1942 brought a renewed German offensive, this time focused on the south. Hitler, desperate for the oil fields of the Caucasus, sent his armies driving toward Stalingrad. The city bore Stalin's name, making it a symbolic prize neither dictator would relinquish. The Battle of Stalingrad, lasting from August 1942 to February 1943, became a hell on earth. The city was reduced to rubble as German and Soviet forces fought for every building, every floor, every room. A factory or apartment block might change hands a dozen times in a single day, measured in corpses. General Friedrich Paulus commanded the German Sixth Army, some 300,000 men trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. As winter closed in again, Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, a massive pincer movement that encircled the entire German army at Stalingrad. Hitler, repeating his disastrous stand fast doctrine, forbade any attempt to break out. The end came in February 1943. Paulus, gaunt and hollow-eyed, surrendered what remained of his army, 91,000 frozen, starving men. Of these, only about 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The rest died in Soviet prison camps. The defeat at Stalingrad was more than a military disaster. It was a psychological earthquake. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. Across occupied Europe, resistance movements took heart. In Germany itself, doubt crept in for the first time. After Stalingrad, the tide of war in the East became inexorable. The Soviets, having absorbed the initial blow and reorganized their industry and army, now possessed advantages that would only grow. More men, more tanks, more artillery, more aircraft. In July 1943, Hitler gambled everything on one last great offensive at Kursk, hoping to regain the initiative. The resulting battle involved over 2 million men and 6,000 tanks, the largest tank battle in history. The Germans threw their newest and best weapons into the fight: Tiger and Panther tanks, Stuka dive bombers, elite SS divisions. They failed. Soviet intelligence had learned of the attack, and the Red Army prepared massive defensive fortifications. The German offensive broke against these defenses like a wave against a cliff. When the Soviets counterattacked, the Wehrmacht began a retreat that would not stop until Berlin. From 1943 to 1945, the Eastern Front became an apocalypse. Cities were obliterated, entire populations were displaced or murdered. The conflict took on an increasingly savage character, with both sides committing atrocities on a massive scale. The Nazi policy of Vernichtungskrieg, war of extermination, had invited a response in kind. Soviet armies, fueled by rage at the destruction of their homeland and the discovery of Nazi death camps, drove westward with implacable fury. Army Group Center was destroyed in Operation Barbarossa in the summer of 1944, with losses exceeding Stalingrad. One by one, the conquered territories were liberated. Poland, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia all fell back into Soviet hands. By April 1945, Soviet artillery pounded Berlin. Hitler, huddled in his bunker beneath the burning city, was a broken man, raving about betrayal and miracle weapons that would never come. The war he had started with such confidence had consumed his empire and was now consuming him. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet soldiers fought their way toward his bunker, Hitler committed suicide. 8 days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The cost of Operation Barbarossa and the Eastern Front was almost incomprehensible. The Soviet Union lost approximately 27 million people, nearly 14% of its entire population. Germany lost about 4 million soldiers on the Eastern Front alone, along with millions of civilians in the final apocalyptic year.